not educational, not fun for anyone involved, and do not involve any in-depth analysis about anything tangentially related to the topic. And finally, they are simply not sustainable. Tricks might win you a couple of debates, but they are not a strategy that will get you through outrounds and in a competitive tournament like Glenbrook PUC, because eventually you'll hit someone who won't fall for it. Voldemort was always afraid of Dumbledore. Dumbledore was always a shade more skilled than Grindelwald. And Hermione just always posed Draco Malfoy. So if you rely on tricks, there's always going to be someone who can out-trick you. So just don't do it. Tricks only win because debaters are not trained well to handle them. But in order to be successful against them, you need to internalize the mindset that tricks are bad debates. They're not rigorously warranted arguments and will fall apart at even the slightest examination. It's actually ridiculously easy to defeat the dark arts. I don't know why so many people are scared of them. You just need to know how. So in this lecture, Marshall and I have prepared 7 strategies that you will need to internalize to defeat the sketch. The 7 Horcruxes that you need to find and destroy. Alright, number 1, constant vigilance. In the Goblet of Fire, Mad-Eye Moody puts a little spider on his desk and torches it before shooting the killing curse at it, which is exactly what debaters who have gone over to the dark side do in debate rounds.
I think it's Barty Crouch. That's actually Barty Crouch.
No, it's no, he torches the spider. No, first he kills it, and then he torches it. He kills it to one spider. One spider.
Technically it's Barty Crouch.
Yes, it was Barty Crouch under the influence of the polyjuice potion, looking like Mad-Eye Moody, but whatever. This is exactly what, anyways, killing and torturing spiders is what we're talking about. This is exactly what debaters who have gone over to the dark side do. They go into round and torture poor little unsuspecting substantive debaters So these are only a few examples of the things that people will do to win. There's no shortage of ways that people will think of to get cheap ballots. Do not fall for this. So long as you are aware of the face of the enemy, you will be equipped to deal with it. So everyone say it with me. Constant vigilance! Constant vigilance! Okay, great. But sometimes it's not so easy to defend argumentative shenanigans by just being vigilant. Sometimes your tactics don't blatantly violate the rules. So next we're going to talk about how you defeat the dark arts through argumentation. Next slide, please. Alright, number 2. Horcrux number 2. Cross-sex is your shield tribe. Cross-sex is most commonly perceived as a time for clarification, but it is more important that you approach it as a performance. It is speech time that is up for grabs. And there are 3 basic goals that you need to achieve in cross-sex against a tricky debater. Number 1. Point out to the judge exactly how meaningless their arguments are. Most tricky arguments are terribly warranted and won't withstand even the most basic examination. Ask them for the warrant behind a particular argument and ask why. Once they give you an answer, ask why again. The infinite why is a devastating tactic against arguments that are clearly not true. Cross-sex is always a time to exploit their weakest arguments, and their spikes are most often the weakest arguments because they don't feel confident enough to fully develop them. I mean, if you are confident enough in an argument to make it into 1AR and win a theory debate, then you wouldn't have to slide it into 1XC and hope that your opponent did not notice it. So the principle here is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. This is like taking off their invisibility cloak. So use cross-sex to point out the contradictions in their cases. Or literally just pick up the case and show the judge their giant block of spikes and say, there's not a paragraph right here, nor do I see a punctuation mark. Ask them if they have even one piece of evidence that talks about the topic. That's always a good one, because they say no and they look really silly. So you just want to show the judge how unreasonable your opponent is being. Number 2, discover the implications of their advocacies, especially if they're awful. Tricks are designed to make as much of your offense as irrelevant as possible. But the reason that this is unstrategic from a persuasive viewpoint is that many of the things that we consider offensive impacts are really important things, like death, suffering, rape, genocide, crime, racism. These are all things that normal debaters and normal people, most people would agree are awful. If you can get the debate to the point where they must concede that at least one of these things is bad, then you have an in against a sketchy debater. But the problem is that they are never going to give you that concession. So you need to punish them for it. Point out the implausibility of their position to the judge. Ask if their position would justify the Holocaust. Ask if their position would justify slavery. Ask if their position would justify rape. This creates very awkward moments of silence all the time in cross-sex because it puts your opponent in a very bad situation. Debaters who run tricks and are sketchy are too scared to make these situations up close and personal. But this is the time to make the debate up close and personal. We can never be 100% divorced from the things that we say in a debate round, and I'm sure that Mr. Timmons and Eli have a lot more to say about that. And even if we switch sides on the resolutions, there's still fundamental things that we as human beings believe in, like the fact that government should probably intervene to stop really bad things from happening. And a debater who defends obviously bad things as being okay will just end up looking like an awful person, probably because they are one. So do not let them get away with defending positions that no reasonable person would believe outside of the debate round. Finally, pin them down. This is like the full body bind charm. They're going to shift your advocacy. They're going to tell you that they're asking one thing and then morph it to mean something else in the next speech. They're not going to want to answer your questions. But you have to tie them down to a specific advocacy. You should be clear on what they defend so you have a stasis point to make arguments against in your next speech. Raise your voices and be stern with these debaters, and force them to defend something for once. Next slide. Alright, third Horcrux. Be a Gryffindor, not a Slytherin. Who's ever been to Pottermore? Who's ever taken like a sorting hat quiz? I'm just curious. You've all taken sorting hat quizzes, and we are all nerds here. Raise your hand if you got Gryffindor. Ravenclaw? Hufflepuff? Weird. Slytherin? That I saw coming. Alright, so even if you're like psychologically a Slytherin, nobody wants to be the Draco Malfoy debate. Be the reasonable debater, because the reasonable debater is the one that everybody wants to win. judge. Many judges do not want to vote for spite. They just need you to give them a good reason not to. This is especially true for frivolous theory arguments. Judges hate theory. Judges hate these debates. So give them a reason to check in on their intuition. Give them an argument, something that they can point to for why intuition comes first, or why they should be allowed to gut check on theory. And they'll thank you for it. Be a reasonable person. Be Hermione. Be Ron. Do not be Draco. Next slide. Alright, Marshall's going to tell you guys about weathering the storm.
So weathering the storm happens a lot when you're on the affirmative and dealing with these sort of tricky strategies, attempting to try to make irrelevant your affirmative position, right? This is going to happen in lots of different ways, from frivolous T-shells that they try to run or to avoid engaging positions, to attempts to not engage in contention level, but say your ethical theory collapses, to permissibility. I know debaters who, against the UTIL Act, will just read like 15 reasons why UTIL can't make moral evaluations and say therefore you negate on faith, even if your framework is true. In order to deal with this, right, you need to be able to articulate a set of principles to allow you to keep your act relevant, even in the event of these sort of continuous onslaughts. So a lot of these are going to appeal to utilizing a lot of the strategies we already talked about, but it's going to stem from the fact that you set your affirmative up well in order to deal with these onslaught strategies. Does that make sense? Yep. Good. So the first thing to do is to recognize the importance, especially against debaters who are going to rely on tricky strategies, of having a balance of offense and defense in your affirmative case from the outset. For instance, when you're reading UTIL, it'll be useful to have argumenting case that explain why UTIL really can't predict the consequences of actions. So they make a bunch of reasons for why UTIL can't calculate consequences, which they're invariably going to do. You already have built-in analysis that's going to interact with that. These arguments are not original. They're the same sorts of theory strategies that use endless, the same sorts of bad philosophical arguments that use it endlessly. And you should be able to take advantage of the fact that they're not doing original research to formulate these positions in order to construct a position that is resilient to the strategy you're worried about. A second aspect of this is that you need to be able to really sell and keep relevant the story that you originally told. This is going to require you to write a framework that articulates the sort of decision procedures that we find morally relevant in the first place. So your ethical theory should not just be a whole bunch of independent cards about why one thing is true and not another. Instead, it should present a picture of how it is that we as humans actually make decisions. And it should be sufficiently realist to actually be able to accommodate the structure of decisions to problematize the way the affirmative is going to talk about decisions, right? So if your ethical theory is grounded in real intuitions about how human beings actually make decisions, then much argument about consequentialism can't make decisions is not going to be plausible. Because the form of consequentialism that you advocate for is sufficiently robust to avoid that concern. A good example of this, right, which I don't support because I think this argument's not very good, but I think illustrates the principle well, is the argument for UTIL that says states are intrinsically consequential as agents, right? They always evaluate consequences because they have trade-offs and things like that. This argument obviously would not then imply that states are going to collapse permissibility because they can't calculate things. Because the sort of consequentialism that the argument appeals to is not the same sort of consequentialism that this case is problematizing, these spikes are problematizing. The sort of consequentialism is a pragmatic, realist position that says governments need to make normative assessments, and these normative assessments have a certain character. You expect that that character has whatever ontological, truth-based significance that trick debater is trying to problematize. Does that make sense? Another good dimension of this is you want to have nuance built into your case. One of the strategies I would always use when I was the affirmative, let's say I was doing a social contract theory, is I make an overview set of responses to my opponent's case. It's like, look, they read a bunch of answers to the social contract, but none of them are specific to Rousseau's social contract. They're all critical in sort of locking into your social contract, which does not account for the specific picture I present, in which the contract is not made between the people and the government, but instead between people who construct the government. Right? I would be able to give that sort of overview story about how these arguments operate on a big picture. And then even if I miss things on the flow, which I would invariably do, I could explain to 2AR when they extended X, Y, and Z dropped argument that no, this argument is not responsive to my position because you know it won't be. You know these positions are not actually responsive. And so all you have to do is present an overall argument which can give the judge a reason to the two where you are, and that allows you to play off the credibility that you have. Does that make sense? In order to be able to do this, you need to be able to develop credibility, right? You need the judge to think that you actually understand the position you're running, right? You have to be able to answer questions in CX that demonstrate clarity in thought concerning the ethical theory you're advocating for, the contentions that you're impacting to, and the fact that you're able to articulate the intuitive relevance of these to decision procedure. If you can do that, it gives you the credibility necessary to pull off these sort of broad overview arguments that problematize the use of spikes in various ways. Other arguments, right, that help keep your app relevant based on sort of intuition pull are things that, we have already talked about. Arguments about how theory should be a gut check, for instance, right? I've had debaters who've had a lot of success against trick debaters by putting arguments like this in the case that articulate how the sort of decision procedure that we actually use necessitates that certain rigorous flow-based frivolous theory arguments don't actually operate on a relevant flow-based metric, right? And the more consistent you can make this with the overall picture of decision making that you present in the app, the more convincing this is going to be to judges. Does that make sense to you, what that sort of argument would look like? Yeah. Say it again. Sure. So I can give you an example, right? We had affirmative cases that would defend a sort of virtue theory of ethics. Like, ethics doesn't come down to any specific set of rules, right? Because ethical theories are always more complex than that, right? When you're at a restaurant trying to decide between ordering X dish and ordering Y dish, it's going to be really difficult. And you're not going to have, like, one principle you're appealing to. Does that make sense? And so if that's true for what you order at a restaurant, A, for to your eye, how much more is that going to be true trying to analyze how to resolve issues of poverty in the U.S., right? They're going to be far too complicated. We put that in, and then we have analysis ready to go about why that sort of principle would mean categories like permissibility aren't moral categories, right? There is no such thing as permissibility under virtue ethics, and there are authors who talk about this, because as you say, it doesn't violate any rules, but morality is more than a set of rules. We would also give arguments then that means that frivolous theory has to be evaluated in a gut check, because anything else doesn't resolve the actual decision procedure. So here's something we put into our case, right? Which I think you want to notice how this differs in sort of degree of development from the sort of theory spikes you might see in other cases, right? This is going to be one argument, which has about the same length as all of the arguments, right, that you heard originally given, but has a sort of strategic implication that problematizes the use of a lot of these theory spikes and things like that. So you're going to be sometimes put a case as this. Evaluate theory via reasonability. This means using judge intervention and making a personal decision about whether an abuse claim is legitimate or ought to be discarded. Flow-based or non-interventionist paradigms promulgate a style of debate that allows certain types of debate to occur, like nibs and skep triggers, that must be governed by a set of theoretical rules. In trying to decide on rules to govern the system of debate via a flow-based metric, you cause two problems. A, you can't judge the validity of certain things in a practice from within the frame of reference in that practice, in this case, technical flow-based debate. And B, at least infinite regress, since adopting a flow-based calculus continually reifies the same types of abuse on each new layer, like blips and spikes and sketchy interps. But theory debate calls to question the existing patterns of debate that are utilizing this, and so those arguments should not be relevant, right? So it takes the same virtue ethic intuition, says rules are not an adequate way to make decisions in complex situations, and says therefore the sort of strict flow-based non-interventionist rule for evaluating frivolous theory debate has the same problem that you might see present in this situation. Does that make sense? So having a case that creates a consistent approach to decision procedure allows you a lot of avenues in order to interact and problematize these ridiculous arguments that simply don't appeal to that same sort of logical structure, right? Understanding the sort of logical system matters there. Another good example of this, I think, is the whole idea of a skep trigger, which takes the form of, you make X argument, therefore skepticism is true. The problem with that, right, is that it neglects the fact that your premises only have a certain degree of strength. Right? Your premises only have a certain degree of plausibility. That means your premises can only justify a certain degree of implausible conclusion. Right? If your friend told you, I'm going to be in Bangkok this weekend, and then you saw them in New York City, you wouldn't be like, oh my goodness, my friend is in two places at once. Right? Even though you have a premise that says they're in Bangkok and a premise that says they're in New York. You instead conclude their flight must have been canceled, right? Or that they came back early, or that this person just looks a lot like them. Does that make sense? So you could not use a fairly weak premise, your friend told you they're in Bangkok, to derive an incredibly ridiculous conclusion they're in two places at once. So too, you can't use a fairly plausible premise that says your ethical theory that says morality is based in international law is false to drive a radical conclusion like therefore no moral theory is true. Does that make sense? It conflates the strength of your premise that was part of the warrant answering the framework to be the same sort of strength of the premise that's adequate in a warrant taking out any framework. And there's simply no plausibility in claiming that one premise could have sufficient strength for both of those purposes. Make sense? So being able to adopt a sort of internally consistent decision procedure allows you to problematize a lot of these techniques in a way that takes them out from the methodological questions about whether or not you would even care about an argument of this structure, rather than trying to have to line by line and beat them all in CX, which can be difficult, especially if you're not as technically proficient on the flow as your opponent is. Right? These sort of big overview arguments, right, are an easy way to keep your act relevant and sort of stand your ground, weather the storm, even if you're not going to be able to deal with each individual part of the onslaught. Cool? Any questions about that? Good.
Alright, just remember that Harry didn't need a spell to deal with each one of the inferi when he went with Dumbledore to retrieve the Horcrux from the lake. They just needed fire. They just needed one spell.
By the way, because I was embarrassed, I looked it up. It was fire.
Alright, next. Discover the Deathly Hallows, which does not make a lot of logical sense because these 7 components are supposed to be the Deathly Hallows, but that's okay. It's just a cute name. Oh yeah, the Deathly Hallows are the good things. But in this case, the things that you were trying to discover, well, I'm not trying to talk through this.
This is not going so well.
I know some stuff. Alright. The point being that sketchy debaters win because they can win slow games. They get their opponents to drop arguments or mishandle things that they will then blow up in the next speech. The only way to combat this is to become as technically proficient on the flow as they are. The thing's flowing. Get good at it. Almost all LV debaters are terrible at flowing. Even most of the people who are like regularly in out rounds at circuit tournaments are terrible at flowing. Bennett, I know, sucks at flowing. So you should do many, many flowing drills. Analyze your flows. Make sure you're getting down all the important arguments. Who knows what back flowing is? I mean, it's just a cutesy term that debaters made up because we like to invent words for everything. The back flowing is just when you don't write down the argument when they're reading the speech because it's frankly going too fast. Just go back and look at the speech doc and then write down the relevant arguments from there. What is shadow flowing? Yeah? That is not shadow. That's a really creative interpretation, but no.
It's like when you write down arguments, like during the speech, like when they're saying arguments.
Yeah, so shadow flowing is when you're planning out your arguments for the next speech at the same time as they're reading arguments. So don't just flow, ask us RBI. Flow like a little weird symbol and then write in your column, ask should not get RBIs because XYZ to remind yourself that you need to respond to these arguments. Especially important is boxing arguments on the flow that you know you have to respond to. Come up with a system for yourself. Star things. Use a different color. Have a highlighter. But make sure that you have a way that you can indicate to yourself, this is important and I need to address it later. That's discovering the Deathly Hallows. Next slide. Alright, finally, know thine enemies. There are 3 components here. 1, knowing the debater. 2, knowing the judge. And 3, knowing the argument. If you think that a certain judge is very willing to vote on tricks, you should not talk to judge. If they write in their paradigm that they are completely tabbed, this is a mark of a bad judge. Nobody is completely tabbed. Everybody has certain preferences, which means that if a judge is totally open to listening for everything, it means he has a preference for bad arguments. You should not press people who are likely to be caving into social pressure. You do not want to press people who have just graduated, that are very close to their friends, who are very close to other debaters on the circuit, and just want to make decisions to please them. I generally think that first year outs make terrible judges. I know that I was a bad judge when I was a first year out, go to tournaments, to see our friends, who don't know how to flow yet, who don't know how to evaluate debates yet, and it takes us a couple years to get there. You should not prep very young judges. You want to prep judges who are willing to check in and take a stand against the dark arts, who view themselves in the debate round not as simply who's there for a paycheck, but as an educator in that particular space, who does not care about social pressure, but rather is willing to vote for what they believe is right. And sometimes it's hard to find on prep sheets for a lot of circuit tournaments these days, but just keep that in mind. Alright, next, know the arguments / know the debaters. The ads in Lincoln Douglas spread like wildfire, so you just want to know the most popular tricks that you can prep answers against them. So here's some popular theory preempts, which I frankly think are absurd. Number 1, cross-X checks. Someone want to clear the cross-X checks argument to me? Who hasn't asked yet? Who's ever heard cross-X checks? Yeah, what is it? What's the argument? Yeah, so like many of these bad theory spikes, cross-X checks is like the ugly stepbrother of an argument that was otherwise reasonable, but just like drawn out to very bad conclusions. So the good version of cross-X checks is not even really an argument, but rather a piece of advice. Before reading theory or a certain counterpoint or dissad that relies on the link, you should probably ask in cross-X whether or not it does in fact link, just to clarify if you're not clear on that. But cross-X checks is the argument that you are literally not allowed to read that shell unless you ask in cross-X, which is BS. Like, no, you do not have to tell them what theory shell you're going to read in cross-X. If it is clear from practice in their case that they violate your shell, then there's no reason why they wouldn't still link even if you did clarify in cross-X. And if it is not clear that they violate, then they should just be making I-me arguments in the next speech. Or maybe you misunderstood their case and you read a bad theory argument. That's okay too. There's no reason why you should be penalized for not asking in cross-X. Also, debaters should not be allowed to backtrack on positions that they advance in the first speech during cross-X. Otherwise, there would literally be no stable basis for attack, which I think is the most important use of this cross-X check card. Like, people will read ask and then say, oh, but I'm willing to alter my advocacy if you ask me in cross-X about certain theory shells. Like debaters that read plan ask and then are like, but I'm willing to defend links to a bunch of other different dissads, but you haven't asked me about them first. Like, no, you defend what you read. Like, you don't get to change that in cross-X and start all debate altogether. Questions about cross-X check? Why are y'all giggling? Is it because you did that? I'm like losing faith in you by the second. Alright, next argument. 1AR theory is bad. Who's heard this argument before? Ian, what's the argument? Yeah, the 1AR does not get to read theory arguments because the 6-minute 2NR then becomes way too difficult. Like, no, you get to read theory in the 1AR. Their interpretation justifies every time it's used in the MC and creates a perverse incentive for neg debaters to be as unfair as possible because they know that the 1AR would be powerless. Like, at least the 2NR, so when you're answering this argument, make it an issue of comparison. So even if it's a little unfair for the 2NR, at least the 2NR has some fighting chance of winning against theory. It's a question of like some abuse versus infinite abuse, which is what would happen if the ask did not get to read theory arguments the 1AR. No. Alright. Next argument. Ask automatically gets RBIs. Actually, we're going to table the RBI discussion for later because I recently changed my mind about this. Okay, next argument. Prefer ask interpretations because there are infinite interpretations of the resolution, so they can't pick which one is best. Anyone heard this before? It's read as like a preemptive T. So people make the argument that you should prefer ask interpretations because there are infinite interpretations of the resolution, so they can't be expected to pick the best one in the 1A speech. Has anyone heard this? Response to T? Alright, there's people in the back. That's okay. You won't hear it. It's terrible. Couple reasons why. First, no, you should hold them responsible for the this sense. Because topicality is just a disadvantage of their approach to the debate, or a disadvantage to their interpretation of the resolution. Alright, next is affirmative framework choice. Who's heard AFC? Who's heard this like O'Donnell card that everybody reads when reading AFC? Alright, something to make clear. This card is from a policy coach talking about framework in the sense that policy debaters use it, which is totally different from framework and LD. Who wants to tell me what framework and policy is? Ex-policy people? Anyone? Yeah. Yes, but can someone supplement that? Amit?
Framework and policy is like topicality of theory or how the round should go rather than how the
How the round should go. Can someone clarify further? Yep.
So, framework is all about how you plan get to solve the topic.
Alright, we're getting there. Bennett.
Policy framework is normally formed by policy questions and evaluation policy impact and
Yeah, yep. Yeah, so policy framework is referring to, I think the best way to explain this is, what is the question that the judge is answering? Because two debaters might think that the judge should answer the question, which plan, which policy action is the best idea? And the next team might think that the judge should answer the question, what's the best methodology for approaching the resolution? Which leads to very different debates. So that's policy framework, which is completely separate from LD framework, which is about what values are important, or what impacts are important, or how should we weigh the ethical relevance of things. And it's just frankly absurd that one debater could pick, could tell everybody only these ethical impacts are relevant and not let that be scrutiny of debate. Like, why? What's the bright line there? Why do you get to choose that as the basis point for debate and have that as a given and not any other argument? So one debater did this thing 2 years ago at the NBA round robin where he just flipped the order of his case. So the framework was the contention level, and then he said all I have to do is the contention level is prove that util is important. And then he read AFC, which meant that he did not have to answer distad, which is honestly a terrible strategy. Which just goes to show that AFC, in the sense that LDers use it, is arbitrary and probably a subtle form of censorship and shuts down debate over important ethical issues. Alright, next argument, presume ask. Who's heard the argument you should presume ask? What is presumption? Someone remind me. Ian. Yeah. So presumption is just the idea that if neither debater is winning offense, the judge should just default to one side. Here's some common arguments for presumption. First is time skew. The negative 7 versus 6 minutes and 6 versus 4 minutes, which means that they have more time to develop their arguments and cover. And if the round is a tie, then you should favor the ask because they had a structural disadvantage because they did the better debating. That is nonsensical. If time skew was such an issue, then we would just let the ask always win. Why don't we let the ask get away with conceding disadvantage returns? Again, we have an arbitrariness issue. Why is presuming ask a way to beat, or why is presuming ask a way to combat or make up for time skew? I also just think that presumption is not a good argument to make in general, because the entire debate round is about generating offense. Why are you wasting speech time on an argument about what happens if you have not made other arguments? Just make arguments. You're supposed to give the judge reasons to prefer your side. It is literally nonsensical to focus on giving the judge reasons to vote for you if there's no reason to prefer either side. If you have that extra speech time, just don't make presumption arguments and win the debate. I mean, so to take out of the app, and there's no reason to vote app or neg, there's still a risk that there might be a link to a dictat, or a risk that the app might solve somehow. So it's a question of the judge being willing to sit there and sift through, okay, which scenario seems more likely, even though there's a very low likelihood of both scenarios. In the rare instances that there is a pure tie, it just doesn't make sense to default app, because, the general trend of policy is that if there's no reason to move away from the status quo, then we should just default to the status quo. The implicit argument being, why take chances? We don't know what's going to happen if we pass the app. If there are not proven benefits of doing the app, then we should not, venture into the void and to the unknown and do things that might cause bad consequences because we don't know. We don't know if it's good or bad, so we should just not do anything at all. That's the only good version of the convention argument, but again, you should honestly never make this argument because you should be spending your debate. I don't know if that's that. You should be spending your debate giving the judge reasons for your side. Alright, so last one. Those are the 7 Horcruxes. We're going to conclude with this. As Severus Snape once said, the dark arts are many varied, ever-changing, and eternal. Fighting them is like fighting a many-headed monster, which each time a neck is severed, sprouts a head even fiercer and cleverer than before. You are fighting that which is unfixed, mutating, and indestructible. I think this is very applicable to debate. There will always be debaters who will try to utilize the dark arts to take out poor, unsuspecting novices and debaters who do more work than them. There will always be debaters who do not care enough about the activity to put the time into researching the topic. But as Albus Dumbledore once said, it is important to fight, and fight again, and keep fighting, for only then can evil be kept at bay, though never quite eradicated. So I'll leave you with a final quote from Albus Dumbledore that has been somewhat edited to increase its relevance to debate. That which sketchy debaters do not value, they take no trouble to comprehend. Of advocacy skills, democratic discourse, and equality, sketchy debaters know and understand nothing. Nothing. That they all have a power beyond their own, a power beyond the reach of any step trigger, is a truth that sketchy debaters have never grasped. So as long as you defend what is good and right in the world, you will never lose to the dark arts. Questions?
What is a bright line?
A bright line is not as dark art. It's just a term that means this is the boundary for when something crosses some condition to another. So for example, it's a very generally applied term, which is why it's hard to come up with a specific definition. But it's just for example, what is the bright line for when something is considered illegal? And the answer to that would be, well, when it's violated a law, right? So it's just how do we determine whether something has.
So it's the boundary point that defines the scope of the concept. So after this is no longer this thing, and before this it is that thing. Right? So the bright line for what is yellow is if it's this dark, it's orange. But if it's not quite that dark, it's yellow. Connor?
So often sketchy debaters and process refuse to answer the questions because they are really spiked in the interior. You theoretical freedom. You will say, what's a spike? I have no idea what that is. Is there any efficient way to get them to admit these things, or is it too hard?
Yeah, so actually I think that the best way to answer this question is to not ask them. If they have read spikes, you should have seen it in the face. And you should have floated it, and you should have answered to it. You do not want to waste process time asking them, oh, did you read stuff that I didn't catch? Did you read things that I missed? Because they're not going to give you the answer that you want. So the best thing to do is be vigilant while they're giving the speech, and make sure you have a gap. Yep.
I was I was around the time when I asked the reader if there was any a priorities, and obviously he said I don't know what that is. And then I moved on to try to explain the a priori. Actually no, he just said that there is an a priori. But then the speech came on 30 seconds left, and explained the a priori, whatever. Then I ran CX and finding he said that hey, at first he said he doesn't know what a priori's are, and B says there are no a priori's, and he just said haha, there are. So then the judge said the judge said that the NR is too late to do that, why are we doing that?
I feel like that is an issue of
colleagues were like, yeah, I got everything. And they sit there and I'm watching them, and they're staring at the screen, and their fingers aren't moving, and they're not writing anything down. But they're uncomfortable with saying, nah, I didn't really get it, for whatever reason. I think if you're debating someone like that, if you need to, for projects that consider, ask, whatever, to pay prep time. Then you take a minute and a half or so, depending on how much you have, and figure it out. Because the reality is you are unable to really engage in process or engage in answers and arguments if you don't really understand it. Somebody asked me a question the other day when I mentioned, well, can you do that? Well, yeah, it's your prep time. And you want to make sure you understand what the position is so you can have a more effective cross-examination so it's not all about clarification. Make sense, everybody? It's a little different perhaps from what you've seen or heard, but in a world you truly don't get it. Better sooner than later.
Another thing I would say about that is a lot of you are going to have to narratively explain your own private skill sets and learning styles and things like that. Like, so because I was extremely dyslexic and couldn't really flow at all, right, as a debater, I had to use very different strategies to deal with some of these things. And I just say sort of the fact of how you debate, right? So what I would often do is before my NCCS, I would hand my opponent a copy of the NC and say, during prep, please mark anything like that your AC preemptively has in it to take out the NC, right? So I was sufficiently confident that the extra prep time they would have answer my NC would make no difference whatsoever. But I was confident that because of the incomprehensible speed, I was not in my dyslexia, I was not going to be able to flow it. And then if they don't mark everything, they look super obnoxious, right? And it just gives them no credibility whatsoever. And so sometimes you have to do what you have to do based upon your own situation. I'd be happy to talk in more detail if anyone has specific concerns they want to try to work.
In your situation, that was just make your argument, right? They can't say it's too late. They shouldn't say it's too late because the only you gave an argument in one yard. You asked did it exist? He or she said no. Then it's like surprise. So you get to respond with surprise, right? It's called a rebuttal. You get to respond to it. Not repeat. Well. I know you don't have it all. I know you want to go eat some lovely brew. I know it's all right. So, anybody else?
clarify if LD is also used in weird ways that don't make sense as to be the important.
The one strategy that was brought on topic of living wage, argument was made that with the app attaching mandates living wage, there was an argument made that you can give incentives to employers as opposed to like a carrot instead of a stick, and making arguments about why mandate would be bad. There'll be a floating tick at the Fed to when that the effect of the incentive when folks only get the same living wage without the mandate. So the argument is there's a two and iron solves all the gaps. Why wouldn't that a mandate is unnecessary slash a mandate bad? And incentives are a better way to get a living wage. You still have a living wage. Solve all the reasons that a living wage is good. The only difference is mandate good and mandate bad. Why wouldn't mandate bad stuff? So the floating big part of it is kind of out there and it's kind of, you know. I would. Well, I mean, it's not like you know, surprise. I mean, it's obvious if I'm the one you are and a mandate versus incentive debate that if they win that incentive would result in a very low a living wage for workers that, you know, it has the same effect as the plan. It's obvious. Right? It somehow the mandate of the better plan results in solving much of the harm area of the act. That's just jargon, or at some point in the debate, going to kind of like follow the act. Yeah,
So the other thing that will happen here, right, is that debaters will be sometimes unclear in the response to the act, but what the actual extent of the negative fiat is. So they'll read, for instance, a counterplans like do this radical tax pay, right? Or engage in democratic reform movements, right? And then so this is an NC example where this is something we wrote, and now try to stretch something so other people might write it and use it, right? Which is, you know, the act, even if it's a good idea for poor people, since poor people are not represented democratically, it's oppressive for the government to force this upon them for their own well-being, absent their ability to voice preferences. So instead, we engage in democratic reforms to let economically disadvantaged people advocate for themselves politically rather than deciding externally for them what policies the government has. Then, right, if you want to make into a floating take, you would say on the app, this means even if the app is a good idea, the counterclaim will resolve it because democratic good will enact a living wage, have them decide for themselves rather than us imposing it on them via the AC prior to democratic reform systems. And then the problem with that would be is if you are not clear whether or not the app is fiating that they're going to do that after the CP, or if it's just like it will probably happen as sort of uniqueness concern, right? And so the scope of what exactly is actually occurring in fiat sense there can be unclear, and then debaters will be like, you didn't answer the fact that I fiat the app later. Now you lose because I solved your app 100%, right? Because they actually just fiat it later on. Or they'll say, we can just do the app once we give it a capitalism. And it's like, well, we could, and you assume like, sure, we could, but it's not going to happen. And they're like, no, I fiat that's going to happen. You're like, that was not clear. So that's the other thing that will happen in LD sometimes, where they will sort of explain that their answer that we can solve the app another way is actually we're going to fiat to solve the app another way, even though it's not a counterclaim.
Time for two more questions.
Yeah.
So, like, how many times have the name I heard people say songs that are like, if this were going to such a level, so it's not just like creativity and stuff like that, but it's actually just like good arguments against it. Like,
Sounds like you have to weigh.
It also sounds like you don't have much of an argument and it's going to respond to a one set of terms because it's not a complete argument.
The strength of the argument is so low.
Yeah, you need to say, I'll answer the argument when they make a complete argument. And be willing to say, well, this means you have more three sentences, it's not an argument. Or the response, you just have to say no solvency, yes solvency. When they see kind of take that mean, does that look ridiculous? Yeah, it does to a degree, but it also points out the relative lack of sophistication in what they have brought up.
I think you can also pretty well tell in these situations. I have quoted detailed research that counts both analytically and empirically for data present, right? That is going to be much stronger argument to see your weak analytical function. Something else I would sort of do is I would make an argument that an argument needs to have these criteria, right? Like, an argument just needs a major premise, a minor premise, an explanation, a conclusion, right? And you're like, so one type of argument literally definitionally cannot be an argument, right? You may not know what's missing, but it definitionally cannot have a complete explanation or claim more conclusion there. Like, there is not linguistic space. Sort of things like that. I don't see that happening very often, though, right? Like, it's a flip form is not common. People, if they want to sort of not engage in the actual game contention at all, they will never like engage in contention with much of the answer.
Question. Have your lab leaders told you what your debates are? Or no? Okay.
Does everyone have access to the schedule? It should be on the, no?
Shipping up back to your lab later about where you were supposed to be as far group will come forward at the end of this. I can tell you where you are supposed to be. Alright? Last chance for any questions for now. Last chance for me. I think you should look at your notes. I think you should talk to your friends. I think you should try to internalize the huge number of concepts and issues that were brought forth today, and at that point then figure out what you want to ask. Some of you were bombarded with some things, even some of you that think you're pretty good. The idea of limited conditionality versus understrain conditionality, maybe vernacular you're unfamiliar with. How then can you use those concepts to put them into practice? Those are all things that I think are rather important. You should also work with your lab leaders to have theory drills and practice rounds where you get to work on and implement and execute the things that you've talked about. Because it's one thing to hear from these two fine folks and their thoughts about all these issues. It's something else to attempt to come close to being as good as they were in executing these things. And that just requires A, a knowledge base, B, a lot of practice, and more practice, and more practice until you get it down. Alright? I would like everybody to make sure that they pick up any trash that may or may not way up, way out. Go get some food, more blood. I'd like to tell you where you're supposed to be. Yeah, thank